Welcome back to the channel for part 4 of What If Ben Solo Never Turns to the Dark Side. You guys really seem to be liking this story and I'm really enjoying telling it, so let's just jump in right where we left off in the last video. As their training progressed, Luke would begin to treat Ben as a partner rather than a student. They would explore the island together, face off in duels that sometimes became quite competitive, and continue to grow closer to one another. One day, they decided to return to the dark cave beneath the island to see what else it had to offer. But this time, as they both touched the mirror together, a portal opened. Luke entered first, and Ben followed. They were in the world between worlds, a wrinkle in time which granted them access to the past and to the future. Luke had heard of this place before, but he'd certainly never been here. Both men were amazed by what they were seeing, but knew better than to interact with any of the portals. Ben was drawn to a particular portal as he turned to his right and approached it. He saw the same man he had encountered the last time he entered this cave, and quickly noticed that he was with that same woman he had seen in the casket. Luke joined Ben and confirmed his suspicion. "These are your grandparents." "I know," Ben responded. A familiar feeling drew them both to another portal. It was black, with nothing to see, but they both walked toward it, and then they saw Palpatine, seated on the throne of the Sith. He looked directly into Ben's eyes as he smiled and began to laugh. They knew he couldn't really harm them, but that laugh alone was enough to send chills down their spines. After a short time, they decided to leave and head back to the island. Luke instructed Ben to keep that experience between the two of them, and while Ben didn't really get why it was necessary, he obeyed his uncle's request. Back at the Jedi Temple, Rey was growing confident in her abilities. She was progressing much faster than anyone Leia had ever seen before, including herself. One night, while Rey fell in and out of sleep as she so frequently did, she had a nightmare. It started with the same dark, evil man she always saw in these visions, the same voice she continuously heard in her head. She saw the Emperor shooting lightning from his hands, directing it at a man and a woman. They both seemed familiar, but it was hard to make out their faces. The Emperor paused and looked at Rey as he spoke. "Ah, yes. My grandchild is home at last. You will take the throne, Empress Palpatine." She awakened drenched in sweat. It couldn't be. Her family loved her. They couldn't be related to him. But deep down, she knew it was true. She began to sob as Leia entered the room and held Rey in her arms. "Dear child, never be afraid of who you are." Rey lifted her head. "You knew? Why didn't you tell me?" Leia responded, "Where you come from doesn't dictate what you will become, Rey. The choices you make are what will decide your future. Some things are stronger than blood." Some years pass and Rey is now 17 years old. The Four Jedi have been training together again for some time now. Luke's power and knowledge of the Force now rivals any of his predecessors, and Ben is not far behind him. He has even surpassed his mother, whose power is not to be underestimated, as she too is now among the greatest Jedi Masters of all time. Rey is no longer a Padawan. She is now officially a Jedi Knight, showing real promise, and even presenting a legitimate challenge for Ben when they train together. But it's what the two of them can do together that's really eye-opening. Their bond has continued to strengthen to a point even beyond what we saw in the sequel trilogy. They sometimes compete as a team against their masters. When push comes to shove, the masters still put the younger Jedi in their place, but even Luke and Leia find themselves on their heels at times due to the maneuvers the dyad allows. One morning, Luke and Leia head for the mainland to gather some resources. This was not unusual as they had done it many times before. They would leave and return a few days later with whatever they found on their trip. Sometimes Rey and Ben tagged along, sometimes they didn't. Unfortunately, this time was the wrong time to leave them behind. After Luke and Leia were long out of sight, Rey noticed a ship heading in their direction. She and Ben watched as it rapidly approached the island. It got closer and closer and Ben knew something was wrong. The ship landed and 12 men set foot on the island. The two Jedi emerged from well above the invaders' position to confront them, but they were immediately met with a load of blaster fire. They retreated as their fears were quickly confirmed. The two re-emerged and attacked the invaders, easily deflecting blaster fire and slicing down a few of the hunters along the way. But they were not easy to catch with jetpacks attached to their backs. They continued to fight until they were caught too far in the open. They were failing to take their enemies out, and suddenly a concentration of blaster fire zeroed in on Rey. She deflected it all, but it was hard work. She couldn't keep it up forever. She became frustrated. It built and built until finally she let it all out. She reached out with the Force and slammed them all to the ground. She lunged from one to the next, taking 3 of them out as she furiously jumped to the 4th. Ben saw what was happening. She was going too far. But there was no stopping her at this point without putting her own life at risk. She chopped down the fourth and the fifth, both of which had already laid their weapons down to surrender. She hesitated for a moment to meet Ben's eyes. He was just standing there, watching her. His expression said it all. Rey regained control of herself. She stumbled backward in disbelief at what she had just done. In her vulnerable state, Rey was shot in the shoulder. Ben threw his saber as it plunged through the sniper's neck. He then retrieved his weapon with the Force, and proceeded to block the blaster fire while shielding Rey at the same time. The bounty hunters were picked off one by their own fire, until it came down to Ben and two hunters who had stood out from the rest the whole time. They did not fly like the others. These two fought with blades that could deflect lightsaber attacks. Ben grabbed them both with the Force and raised them into the air. Why have you come here? Somehow, against Ben's will, they lowered themselves back to the ground and charged. He mumbled to himself. Well, that wasn't part of the plan. They threw blades and an array of steel weapons Ben had never seen before. He froze some and redirected others as he leapt directly over his opponents and landed behind them. They continued forward, heading directly for Rey. He pulled the blaster his Uncle Lando had given him from his belt and fired 2 shots. They both dropped dead. Rey laid on the ground, shocked by what had just happened. Ben sat down next to her and healed her wound with the Force. It's all right, Rey. We've all lost control before. It's a delicate game we're playing, trying to balance 2 sides of one force. But those two, Ben, they had surrendered. They were defenseless. I knew they were defenseless. I knew I shouldn't keep going. But something told me to kill them. I lost control. He was a bit unsettled by what she had just told him, but he responded reassuringly. I know the feeling. You did lose control, and you recognize your failure. Facing fear is the destiny of a Jedi. This was your first experience, but it won't be your last. He stood and then offered to help Rey to her feet. She smiled and took his hand. Luke and Leia would return to the island that evening. Seeing the bodies that Ben had gathered and prepared for cremation, Leia asked him what happened. She and Luke had felt that something was going wrong, but some more details would be nice. These hunters attacked us. We had no choice but to defend ourselves. Ben looked at Luke. I found a symbol on a few of their arms. I don't recognize it, but I thought maybe you would. Luke evaluated the symbols and then spoke. These were skilled assassins. They came to kill you, maybe to kill us all. Working for the Emperor, no doubt. Luke leaned in close to Ben. How did Rey handle it? She did fine, Ben replied. Luke grinned as they both walked back toward their quarters. Ben looked to Rey, who was sitting on a ledge. He nodded and gave a reassuring smile. Rey found comfort in Ben's support for her. She and Leia joined Luke and Ben as they gathered to discuss their next move. And that's the end of part 4. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, please let me know in the comments section below. Leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed, and may the Force be with you always.